So we are back for another season of the Religion of Human Nature podcast. I'm your host, Rabbi Jeremy Fine, and I have two amazing guests, which I always say in every episode, and then I explain why these are amazing guests. These two people I know from the history of my life. I want to first introduce Dan Gregor, a writer and director in Hollywood from things like How I Met Your Mother, and as I said a little earlier, The Comedians, a show that I loved very much. And Dan and I went to Israel together many, many moons ago. It seems literally like forever ago. Dan, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. I couldn't find my car keys, so I'm just doing this in my house, and I feel pretty lost.
Well, you're doing a great job so far, so wonderful.
Thanks.
And my freshman year college roommate, whose book I found at Barnes and Nobles and basically jumped out of my seat, Neel Patel. How are you, Neel?
I'm good. I'm alive.
You're so they're both in California. I'm recording today from Chicago, and we're going to just jump into the idea of deflecting with humor. And these are two really great guests to talk about this, writers and people dealing with, ways to make things a little lighter in our lives. So Dan, the first question is to you. You've written some amazing show. Where does your humor emanate from?
Um, I mean, personally, I feel like my humor has evolved to primarily come from a place of examining weakness and failure and like anything that is sort of the cracks in the facade of a person's personality or how they present. I think that it's it can be used in any way, sort of like empathetically or satirically, but I find I'm more and more gravitating towards writing about even writing about bad people who I'm still empathetic towards. And that's where the comedy comes from. Is that like even when they have weaknesses and failings, it's still from a place of something that we can all sort of identify the why of it. Um, and so that to me is sort of, I think, what I'm finding more and more is the comedy that I enjoy making. Um, but there's a marketplace of all sorts of types of comedy that I enjoy consuming that is doesn't necessarily fall under that rubric.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, we all should be examining weaknesses and also smiling about them because otherwise we don't grow as human beings. And to see them reflected on television, I think helps a lot of us. It's always like the famous thing is when you're with your spouse and you look over when something on TV is exactly what they would do and you start laughing and she looks back at you and she
Mhm.
says, "What?" And I'm like, "Nothing."
Yeah,
So
yeah. It's there's something, I think that the type of comedy that I most enjoy making and watching is the one that also feels like someone's punching me in the stomach. Um, or just like, oh, I recognize that too well. That emotion, that event, that moment. It's so painfully real, and I want to both like go like lie down in a ditch over it, and I'll be laughing for the next like year.
feel that was a lot of like How I Met Your Mother and Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, where they, touched on these points where we all sort of felt a part of that story.
Yeah, I mean that was when I got hired at How I Met Your Mother. That was definitely I was the young kid who was living in New York, still kind of living like a single life, and so I very actively got hired there because all of them had sort of aged out of those stories in their lives, and so they'd sort of used up their fill of like New York dating and failure stories basically, and so I was sort of a guy they brought in at that point, like midway through the series, to sort of refurbish their take on New York dating failures. Actually had a show at UCB at the time, which is sort of what got me hired for this, called well, originally it was called Banging My Dick Against a Wall, which is what I felt like my dating life was. And then when we got picked up to IFC as a pilot, and it was called Idiots Dating, which is a nicer name.
Yeah.
Um, and um, And but yeah, so it was like I was just so deeply living the failed dating life, that those stories of it were funny and accurate and real to examine for How I Met Your Mother. Um, yeah, um, that's right.
That's right. All right, Neel. So your book was witty and great to share ideas of culture. I absolutely loved it. As your first attempt, how hard was it for you to develop these stories in a lighthearted way that all readers, not just ones from a specific culture that didn't know about it, could relate to? Like someone for me, like these were stories I
Yeah.
didn't know, but certainly related to it.
Yeah. I think actually what's interesting is I had the opposite challenge. Like I wanted to be way more lighthearted than what was like required. And I think oftentimes my editor would tell me to tone down the humor because it was a little bit too much. And I think I kind of internalized like humor for me was like a defense mechanism. And it was the only way I knew how to talk about my culture and my background. You know, I grew up in the 80s and 90s where nobody knew what an Indian was, you know? And on top of that, I'm like 5'3.5", 5'5" on my dating profile, but 5 foot, but you got to add that extra inch and a half. You know, and gay. So that wasn't easy walking down the halls. And I don't know. I learned from a young age that if I just make fun of myself and my background and the culture in a way that like, let's say like white kids find hilarious, well, then that's kind of my shield through life. And so I actually had the opposite problem when I was writing this because it was supposed to be serious literary fiction. And I want it to be. So sometimes, you know, when you're writing literary fiction, the humor, it's appreciated, but it needs to be intentional and it needs to kind of tell a story. Um, and so it actually wasn't hard. I mean, I think when you're so different from everyone around you, you kind of become a set of eyes for them and you're constantly observing them. And I think I internalize a lot of what I saw um, other people doing, straight people, white people, what have you. So
Tall
yeah,
people.
tall people, yes. Tall people at the bar when they want to like push you out of the way.
If you can imagine, for those listening or watching, Neel and I would walk around campus together.
Oh
Neel was
God, yeah.
always dressed perfectly. I was always in pajamas. I'm 6'3" Jewish kid, 5'3" Indian, and people would be like, "Are you guys friends?" We're like, "Yeah, we love it." Like,
Yeah.
we're like an odd couple, right?
I know. That should have been a movie.
Well, we got writers on this call, so we
All
got.
right,
Yeah.
I'll start cracking on this, guys.
Yeah.
What are we calling this? Big Jew, small gay?
Yeah. Actually, that's a great title.
There you go. So let's stay on the topic. Jerry Seinfeld said once on his show that comedians in cars getting coffee, that like humor has to come from like some place of suffering or a hardship when you're younger, and also like Jewish comedy for we don't really talk so much about religion on the show, but the idea that like Jews often found their way into comedy because of what they were feeling with society. So how does religion and culture play a role in comedy for both of you? And I don't mean religious like observance, but like your background and where you guys are from.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, for me, I mean, I think it's pretty uh, to your exact point. It's pretty elemental. Obviously, religion's not the point, but otherness is. The feeling of being an outsider who has the ability to observe. I mean, literally, exactly what you're just saying, Neil, which is the ability to observe others with a critical distance, is I think the primary muscle in creating comedy, and so being from a religious minority, being from a racial minority, being from a sexual minority, like all of those things they don't make you funny, but they are almost like a required first step to even be able to like see why things are funny, or off or weird. Because again, like funny is just sort of tragedy exploded through time or like heightening it. And so it just takes, I do think it takes a lot of otherness to really get uh, to feel comedic in a lot of ways. But then, but then at the same time, I mean, what that's my belief, and that's the way I've lived my life, and as also like a minority in most of the world that I live in, and that it always felt very elemental to how comedy came about in my brain. But then you look at like the fucking Harvard Lampoon, and you're like, those guys are the most successful comedy writers in the world, and they're all the most white bread, like
Mm.
Protestant, as powered. I mean, they might as well be the skull and bones like Harvard frat, but like with a beanie on their head. Like it's the same thing. So my theory has holes, is what I'm saying.
That's fair. Neel?
Yeah. No, I mean, I feel the same way about otherness. And for me, uh, I realized that if I could connect with people by making them laugh. And yes, people saw me as different, but if I kind of acknowledge that, kind of acknowledging the elephant in the room, well, then it makes people feel a little bit more comfortable. And I think oftentimes we use humor as a way of um, addressing something that's uncomfortable in a lighthearted way. So I was that kid who used to always like do the Indian accent to like make all my friends laugh. And I feel bad now because I think I really did my parents a disservice because I used to imitate my parents, but I would lay it on really thick, like Apu from Simpsons, and they don't talk like that. And I'm just like, if they knew I was doing that, they would be so offended. But it made, it made everyone in the class laugh. And for that period of time, I felt like I was being seen. And so that's kind of how I was and it's weird because now we're experiencing this cultural shift where it's all about owning your otherness and being proud of where you came from. And it's weird because I was that kid who was just making fun of it the whole time.
Neil, can I ask you a question? Because I have I have several Filipino friends who are comedians, and they really fall in very opposite sides of this. Where like, they love making fun of their parents. They love making fun of like the culture they come from. And part of that is doing the voice of the world they're from, of the immigrant experience they're from. I know that my father's Israeli. Like I make fun of his accent all the time, and make fun of Israelis, and make fun of Jews, and but then I have another Filipino comedian friend who's like thinks it's gross, like to make fun of people's voices, their whatever, their immigrant differences. And I guess I'm just, because again, like I'm just curious, like where you feel that line is between like a loving send up within an in group versus something that's like hurtful.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard people say the same thing. Like there are people who feel like, oh, well, you're just pandering to white expectations of you and, reinforcing stereotypes. But I feel like that if that's the way in, and then you can open yourself up to talk about other things, I think it's okay. Because I mean, at the end of the day, an Indian accent is funny. Like, it's not the sexiest accent in the world, trust me. Like, it's not a panty dropper. So I mean, I'm okay making fun of it. So I think if that's the only thing people want to see from you, then that becomes a toxic cycle. But I think if it's a way in, then I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, it was a great segue to what I want to talk about next. I actually saw it this morning. Sarah Silverman was apologizing to Paris Hilton for like I think that's my in-laws. I apologize. It will be edited out of the podcast, not out of YouTube. so Sarah Silverman was apologizing to Paris Hilton for jokes she made in 2007. And Sarah Silverman has been on every roast. I mean, she's really gone out. I don't think it's necessarily inappropriate. I think when you sign up to go to a roast, you're there to roast. I mean, you were there specifically to make people. But she was apologizing to her. Do you feel that humor is being sort of under attack as a way to sort of bring out thoughts and feelings? I mean, you both are in California. You both are writers. Are you getting pushback on stereotypical jokes, whether it's your own cultures or others? Or is that just sort of something that Joe Schmo is feeling?
Would you like me to go? Would you like to go?
You can go first.
Um,
It's a difficult question to answer.
yeah, I mean, look, I want to first say, like, the really, really important caveat that, like, that every generation of people is angry and pissed at the younger generation of people for taking their culture. So that's like ad infinitum, going back throughout history. Every group of people is upset that they're no longer the cool people coming up with culture. So
Mhm.
that's like the most important thing to say, is that, like, most of people complaining, like a Jerry Seinfeld or someone complaining that, like, these kids aren't funny anymore, they don't like humor. Well, it's like, well, they don't like your humor, you old fuck. And so, like, and so it's just to say that, like, I might like Jerry Seinfeld still plenty, but that doesn't mean that he has a guaranteed place at the top of the comedy hierarchy for life, or for forever. So that's important to say. And I would also say, I think that, like, of a large majority of the jokes that people are, that, like, aren't, like, PC anymore, whatever you want to use for it, were not offensive, not offensive, whatever. They were bad. They were bad jokes. They were punching down at people who didn't really have any reason to be punched at. They were hacky. They weren't insightful. They were not clever. They're I'm also a comedian, someone who came up through comedy clubs, and so, like, you know, people were doing rape jokes for a decade, right? Like, and rape jokes were not just a normal part of like a comedy act, but they were almost like a given. Like, you couldn't go to a comedy show without hearing the word rape a dozen times. And and so, it's important to, like, understand that within the context, even of the context of comedians, that shit was hacky. It wasn't clever, it wasn't smart. So, like, if people are offended by it, they might be offended, but they're also reacting to the fact that you're not saying anything worth saying. And so, as someone who creates content and art, I often get angry at, um, the way that an audience or a reviewer or a critic, and especially everyone's a critic now, might conflate the reaction they have to something with the point of view of the person who made it. And so, it sometimes when a bad joke comes out, it's just a bad joke. It's not that the person is a bad person. um that's part of the creation process, is to, like, try and fail. Um but that doesn't mean that, like, the jokes were any good. Like, that doesn't mean that, like, you're some righteous warrior who is like, oh, this stuff was fucking gold, but you don't appreciate it. It's like, no, it was probably shit too. I can curse on this podcast, right?
Yeah, I mean, my kid listen. She's in kindergarten. That's cool.
I realize
After
I'm
you
like,
just dropped a bunch of
I,
expletives.
I was like, I'm just fucking railing on. I'm just gonna drop every curse word I know. And then you're like, my in-laws are in the other room. Um, but anyway, so those are like my two mega caveats to say that, like, this is not nearly the problem that it maybe seems to some hyper Twitterized people. Um, but then the other part of it is probably to say that, like, the critic landscape of the internet has actually changed the ability to develop comedy, um, because your first thought joke is now all of a sudden your last thought joke. Whereas, like, I can only imagine how many drafts of something you go through, Neil, before anyone ever reads it.
Right.
And similarly, like, if I'm writing a script or a screenplay, like, that's same thing. Like, I try to hold on to it as long as possible before other people consume it. But you're talking about, like, comedy or live comedy. Um it's part of the creation process is the feedback of an audience. I mean, you can't really make a good stand-up set. You can't really develop, like, live material without the live aspect. And so, and same thing, unfortunately, for Twitter and anything you put up on the internet, which is sort of obviously it's removed the gatekeepers in a lot of ways, and that's wonderful. But the gatekeepers did help develop something until it was like really actually worth saying, as opposed to just sort of the first thing out. And so I do think there's been a conflation of like of content that is, maybe in a different era would have been a throwaway piece of bullshit at an open mic or something, or a first draft that only like your editor or your friends saw, that now is out there for criticism and critique, and everyone's a critic. So and the critics are very harsh on Twitter. So that part of the culture has shifted and changed in a way that is 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 bad, frankly, in my opinion, as a creator. But it does just mean that there's a different onus on creators now to do the more of the hard work in private. But without, you do need a safe space sometimes to be able to like work through big ideas, hard ideas. You you do want to be able to figure out where the line is. Like, am I saying something edgy but important, or am I just saying something edgy for edgy's sake? And it's hard to know exactly where that is, or and you need to test that out.
Yeah.
Dan, are you saying that your Twitter follow Steve 8947242 is really bothering you? I mean, he seems like a real good human being, right?
Steve is a great guy, and he's never threatened me.
Neel, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm less critical of people, as Dan was saying, like when you're doing stand-up comedy, like sometimes people just, I'm someone who half the times I don't even know what's coming out of my mouth or what's going in. But so I I often say the wrong thing all the time. But like when it comes to like television shows, or like Dan was saying, when you write something, it's multiple drafts. There's many people, especially in TV, there's executives, there's all these people looking at. So then when I see something, like actually the other day I was watching like an old episode of Sex and the City, which was a show that I really liked. And there was this episode where Samantha dates a black man. And I was cringing throughout the whole episode because I was like, this is so problematic. And I'm just like, wow, like the fact that this actually made it on air. And then I was like, oh, but I bet there probably weren't any black people in the writer's room, And so part of it is also just inclusivity and incorporating different people in a writer's room. If you are like, I have this problem now, I feel like as somebody who's trying to develop material, I feel like there's this expectation that I should write about Indian people and that I should like have something to say about my culture and all of that all the time. And it's not really something I want to do all the time. I was raised watching white people on TV and black people on TV. Like, I don't want to just write Indian characters. I don't know where that came from. I feel like I just went on a tangent, but
No, I think it's fair.
I mean, I think also, the other thing to like is really important to say about comedy specifically is that like, going back to my previous point, I guess, of comedy tastes change, they grow, and they age. And so like I just recently, I was like, I want to watch an old classic movie, and I just watched. So I was like, oh, what are some of the funniest movies of all time? I like old movies, and I put on Some Like It Hot, which I'd never seen, which is like supposed to be the greatest comedy of all time. And I turn it on, and I'm like, this is a terrible movie. It's not funny. It's offensive. It's gross, and it's just like it's awful. And so like and it just like really reinforced the thing that I've always felt, which is like comedy is inherently something that like is really only funny like in a brief window of time and culture that it exists in, and it's very, very, very hard to find comedy that doesn't age out of that window.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's so few things that are genuinely funny forever, and so I do think it's unfortunate that we are in a place where people's where again, like, comedy someone made in the 90s is there is almost no way for it to accord to the values of this moment. It's almost impossible. I think you'd be shocked to like see like going back to how many of your favorite comedies from any era are either are offensive or and maybe less than offensive, just not funny anymore. Um,
Mm.
and that's the bottom line is that like it's not it's not meant to live forever in that way. Um, Unfortunately, I've devoted my life to it, and wow, what a mistake. Um,
Except
because
Tommy
it's
Boy.
Tommy Boy can't you can't improve on
Yeah,
Tommy Boy.
Tommy Boy's good.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, but look, and it's funny because I mean, very getting very specific. Like I just recently went back and I watched Naked Gun, and I got to tell you that movie is fucking amazing.
It's
Still,
hilarious.
it's
Yeah.
so good. But like, and I mean it because I go back and I watch a lot of old comedies, and because either for work or as research or something, and it's very rare when something is genuinely still like laugh out loud funny. Like there's old comedies where you're like, I like that. That was nice. That was good. That was humorous. I call them smilers when you're like, eh. And like, and that's the most you can normally get from an old comedy is like a, eh. and and this is but that one, man, really held up. But one of the reasons I think it really held up was because even when it was made in, I think, 89 or 90, it was not meant to be for that time period. It was like a spoof of a genre piece from whatever, like a detective show from like the 50s or 60s. And so even at the time it wasn't a timely piece. It was meant to be a throwback piece, and so it remains a throwback piece in an amazing way. Anyway, as a weird little observation of a specific movie that still works, but like I mean, Mel Brooks is a great example. Like who again, like I'm in love with, I'm obsessed with. I on a couple occasions I've gotten to meet him, I've cried during and afterwards. Like it's a big deal, but like you know man, could you not make Blazing Saddles today?
Right.
Man, could you not make Blazing Saddles today? And the movie was amazing and important, but also like, there are a lot of things in there. You're just like, I'm not gonna fucking do that or say that, and nor do I want to. Like, I don't think that it's I don't think that it's somehow a PC weakness to not want to make fun of like the you know developmentally disabled or like people of different races. Like it's not it's it's not being it's not self-censoring. It's just sort of earnest growth and like and change and education. So but I'm happy the movie exists. I want it to exist, and it's on a continuum of comedy and conversation that had to happen. Like without Blazing Saddles, you don't get all sorts of other movies um, that are amazing, but leading all the way up to today. And so you know, but it doesn't mean that it has to be perfect forever. But I also think importantly, it doesn't mean that we have to be mad at it for not being perfect.
Yeah, I agree with that. Actually, for in full disclosure, I have a when I met Mel, he signed Blazing Saddles DVD, which is one of my favorite movies.
Yeah, yeah,
Agreed. In 2020, you not only shouldn't you can't make that humor, you should make that humor, but it's a continuum, and if we don't learn, if we just erase it,
right.
then we don't have the history to understand, and we'd be wiping away such an important piece of the time. And it was bad for a lot of people, but that was where comedy in society was, for better or for worse. And we evolve because we learn. So that's what the last question is. What do we have to learn from humor, and how can humor sort of, I would say, be an antidote to some of what's going on in the world of sort of this tension that I think everyone's feeling. Maybe not in California because weed has been legal for a really long time, but for everyone else, it how can what can we really learn from the comedy world, and maybe humor is our teacher now, not just our release. Neel, you want to start?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I'm trying to think of something like that makes sense. um, what can we learn from humor? I mean, I think humor is kind of the great equalizer, right? Like, I mean, unless you don't have a sense of humor, in which case I don't want to know you and you don't matter. Like, I think it's if you can, it's the best way sometimes to convey an idea that is uncomfortable, as long as you're not offending anyone, because everybody kind of appreciates humor. Everyone wants to laugh. And so oftentimes you can take something that's uncomfortable or people don't want to talk about and make light of it. And then people will actually listen to you. And I think right now we live in a time where we're more divided than we ever were, you know? And I feel like a lot of people are just talking at each other. But I think if used correctly and appropriately, humor is the greatest vehicle to convey ideas to people. So.
I maybe used to believe that, but the last 4 years have completely shattered my
Oh,
my
really?
belief in exactly that, which is like I I, I first of all, Donald Trump on a daily basis wrote better Onion headlines than the Onion, right?
Yeah.
And so and the division between our points of view became so vast that it does seem to me very hard to even have a shared set of facts to joke off of. And again, I'm not, and I don't want this to be how I feel, but it is how I've grown to feel. So I don't know the answer to this. It sort of is a negation of your question, Jeremy, which is like, how does comedy help the world? I don't know, man. I don't know how it helps the world. I'm not sure it does. I think it might just make us feel better, but for a very few amount of people, like it might be a retreat into our own little tribes, which is, it maybe is where the world is heading. But like Kevin James has a new NASCAR show. I'm like, I don't fucking want to watch that.
I saw
Um,
that one. You're not missing much.
yeah. Like, I mean, like, that's clearly not for me, and that's okay. That's okay. Like, I mean, Netflix is, if anything, a distillation of the fact that, like, yeah, everybody's got very different tastes, and nobody needs to watch the same thing as anybody else. Like, there's a bifurcation of culture that is happening that's really pretty intense. And I do think I think it's sad and probably going to lead to the demise of our country. Um, but but I don't know if there's a good answer to it. Like, the answers would seemingly be like to make cable and Netflix illegal, and we can only have like the big four channels and have to all watch the same sitcoms again. Maybe that would fix everything if we all had the Cosby Show one more time.
Not the Cosby Show, but something else.
Oh no, the Cosby Show. Did something happen with him?
Yeah, it's new news. Everyone's going to come back to synagogues and churches, and I'm going to be it's going to work out for me, I think.
Comedy rabbi, baby.
One of the best things I watched during this year of lockdown was David Letterman's interview with Dave Chappelle, which was masterful. By the way, I wasn't a huge fan of Letterman. I think, Dan, you worked on Letterman show,
I did work at Letterman. It was one of my first jobs out of college.
Yeah.
Worked as a.
So I wasn't a huge fan of his show, but his show on Netflix, I love.
Mm-hmm. He is a great interviewer. He hates everything else.
Yeah. So he said after some of the war, Bob Dylan's music really was so important, and Bob Dylan's voice was so important. Actually, for someone like me who can't really listen to Bob Dylan today, where other people just love him, like I just can't. He believes, Dave Letterman, and said this to Dave Chappelle is that answer, and I didn't disagree with him. Like, Dave Chappelle's comedy is so important to me right now to listen. I mean, this is my own personal feeling, but comedy plays a massive role in bringing us back. I think so, bringing us back together, whether it's writing shows or sort of the lightheartedness that you bring to whatever it is, politics, religion. Man, I would love some of these politicians to just smile. Just smile. Like, that's all I need from you right now. I don't need you to fight with anyone else. That's what
I'm a big fan of memes. I think memes are I just love a good meme.
You're not wrong.
They're so accurate. Like, sometimes I'm like, who's coming up with this? Like, just the day-to-day, minuscule things that we're thinking about, and it'll be on a meme. I'm like, oh my God, I'm not the only person who thinks this. And they seem to be very they're not too problematic. I think anyone can laugh at a meme. So
you're right about that.
Maybe we should all just be writing memes.
You might be right. I mean, they nail it. They're very funny, but they're also abstracted to the point of meaninglessness, and so that's why everyone likes them, because you're just you can project onto any meme your own personal issue. I feel like the meme of Donald of the wrestler, the meme that Donald Trump made where he put himself on a wrestler and he was like body slamming someone. Jeremy, you know what I'm talking about.
Well, I admit he was in the WWE.
He was
at a WrestleMania,
right,
and he's obviously he wasn't going to lose because he's
yes, because
he still hasn't lost, right? So
he's undefeated. Donald Trump,
in his head.
Undefeated in the WWF, undefeated in the American electoral system. Anyway, it just like that. I feel like I've seen that wrestling meme of like a flying elbow from the top rope with like a different face photoshopped onto the person getting elbowed in a dozen different forms, because it works. It's just a format. I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, the memes are definitely. I think it's more of a format than it is an art, and it's like it's like a sitcom or anything else. It has no message unto itself.
I want to thank you both for being here. I appreciate your time, and we'll catch up soon. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Bye, guys. Nice meeting you.
Bye. Nice meeting you.